What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Warden Healer. So the Warden Healer is up there with Templar Healer as one of the strongest healers in the game right now, both in terms of raw healing power as well as overall group utility. Now the Warden Healer does provide a little bit more utility, at least in my opinion, compared to a Templar Healer, but it's a different type of utility, whereas the Templar Healer is pretty good at dishing out heals and has a very strong kind of utility with shards. Warden Healers, on the other hand, give out a lot more named buffs, so Major Ward, Major Resolve, Minor Intellect, Minor Endurance, things like that. So they both kind of fill different needs of the guild, of the raid group itself. So a lot of groups now are running both a Templar and a Warden Healer. Other groups are still sticking with 2 Templar Healers, and some groups are even going with 2 Warden Healers, but I would highly recommend considering adding in a Warden Healer in place of a Templar Healer for your raid groups, because of the amount of utility that a Warden brings to the table. They don't have that. Their healing strength, their healing potential is on par with or a little bit less than in Templar, but it's definitely enough to kind of get everything covered in terms of healing and the amount of buff that they provide for the group. A lot of these buffs are a little bit more difficult to obtain from a DPS perspective, even from a tank perspective, so it's always nice to be able to get these additional buffs added into your raid group here. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you basically need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. And we're talking a lot about the gear substitutions and skill substitutions that you're going to want to make depending on the specific trial you're running, depending on a specific fight. So I will be going over a lot of different gear sets, a lot of different skill combinations here. Unlike DPS, obviously healers don't really have any sort of fixed rotation. There's no parse that we can do as a healer. So instead I'll kind of talk about my philosophy of healing, how I approach healing, and I'll give you guys a few names that you might want to take a look into if you're interested in seeing how Warden Healers perform in high-end Vet Trials content. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So monster helm sets are a thing here with healers ever since Somerset, where staves counted as 2-piece bonuses. We've been able to wear monster helm sets. So currently there are 4 monster helm sets that you're going to want to consider running as a healer. You're going to want to have all 4 of these sets ready and prepared because they all are useful in different situations. My go-to is going to be Bogdan. Bogdan comes from Elden Hollow 2, so it is a base game set that you can obtain. So when you heal a friendly target, you have a 5% chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters for a certain amount of health every second. Now, while the proc chance does seem fairly low at 5%, you have to keep in mind that this is with every single tick of healing that you do. So if you put down healing springs and you hit 6 people, that's 6 independent chances in order to proc Bogdan. So even though it's only a 5% chance, it actually procs fairly often because each individual heal that you do has a chance of proccing Bogdans. So Bogdan is very nice. Gives you a lot of additional heals, so you can focus a little bit more on kind of maintaining your buffs, maintaining your debuffs, instead of having to focus a lot on the healing aspect of things. I did mention that there are 4 sets, so this is only one of them. The second set that you're going to want to consider picking up, or that you should pick up, is going to be Earthgore. So Earthgore is a monster helm set from Bloodroot Forge, so you will need to have access to the Horns of the Reach DLC in order to grab this set here. So when you heal a friendly target that's under 50% health, you conjure a pool of quenching blood underneath them, which soaks up 1 enemy placed effect and heals all friendly targets in the area for X amount of health over 6 seconds. Now, Earthgore, as you can tell here, just from the huge amount of healing that it does over 6 seconds, is a very bursty heal set. So if you split up that heal over 6 seconds, it ends up being over 6,000 health per second tick. And it basically heals everybody within that Earthgore proc. So it's a very, very strong burst heal set. Now this is balanced by the fact that it can only occur once every 3 to 5 seconds, so you're not able to necessarily rely on this all the time like you would with Bogdan, which has a 6-second duration on a 6-second cooldown. But that being said though, Earthgore has its uses. So in instances where you want more burst heals, good examples would be something like Cloud Rest, potentially in Asylum. Earthgore is really going to stand out here. So between Bogdan and Earthgore, Bogdan is going to be more consistent, it's going to be lesser heals, while Earthgore is going to be a lot more bursty with a stronger heal. Especially when you take into consideration things like major minor vitality, major minor mending. They will scale accordingly that way. So Bogdan and Earthgore, 2 very good monster helm sets that are pretty much focused directly on healing. These next 2 sets, one of them has sort of a small healing component, but it's going to be more for sustain, and the second one's going to be just the pure sustain. So you're going to want to pick up Sentinel of Rkugamz. So this is a Helm set from Darkseed Caverns 1, base game dungeon, very easy to complete here. So when you heal a friendly target, you have a 10% chance to summon a Dormer Spider that heals for X amount of health and restores 524 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters every second for 8 seconds. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, so as you can see here, this is a smaller heal compared to Bogdan and Earthgore. Only 1358 health compared to Bogdan's, which heals 4111 health every single second. That being said, this is balanced out because this set also returns stamina to anybody within that 5 meter radius here. So very, very nice to have when you have a bunch of stamina DPS that are all stacked up. And even if you have just Magicka DPS, that additional stamina might come in handy if you're in a fight where you have to dodge roll very often, or you have to use break free very often, or anything like that. So Sentinel Rkugamz is a very, very nice set to have here. Now there is a little bit of kind of a downer here, which is that doesn't necessarily will proc on the person that you want it to proc on. So this is more useful for stacked fights. So if you're kind of far away from the group and you hit yourself and it happens to proc on you, it'll basically follow you around and not really get to the stamina DPS. So that's just something you want to keep in mind if you're going to be using Sentinel here. Final Helm set that you're going to want to pick up is going to be Symphony of Blades. So this is a new Helm set from Depths of Malatar, so you need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to grab this set here. When you heal an ally who is under 50% of their primary resource, you grant them a Meridia's Favor, restoring X amount of Magicka or Stamina, whichever maximum is higher, every second for 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 18 seconds here. Now, Symphony of Blades is one of those Helm sets that on paper looks very weak. It can only proc every 18 seconds and only procs on one person. But if you are using 2 or more of these sets, it actually ends up being pretty nice. So if you think about it, if you have 2 healers running Symphony of Blades, it basically gives 2 people basically an additional sustain every 18 seconds. It might not necessarily proc on the same person over and over again either. And it's under 50%, which is actually not that uncommon to reach, but it's also not easy to reach either. So this is a pretty nice set to run, but it's not going to be necessarily useful in all situations. So in fights like Cloud Rest and Asylum, where you might need the more healing strength, especially for progression style guilds, you're going to want to stick with something like Bogdan's instead. But Symphony is definitely a set that I would recommend picking up in those instances where you might want the additional sustain here. But again, if you're the only one wearing Symphony of Blades, it does lose a lot of power because you're only able to give it to one person at a time. You would need to basically have 2 healers run Symphony of Blades in order to really consider using it actively as a Helm set for healers. And again, you do have to take into consideration the specific fight that you're in, whether you want the additional heal from Bogdan or you want no more resources from Symphony here. Now for our other sets here, you do have 2 sets to run. So these can be split up generally into body sets, basically sets that you want to wear on the body at all times, versus back bar sets, which you can basically wear on one bar and still get that 5-piece bonus where it's relevant. So starting off with our body sets. Olorime. This is the most powerful support set that you can run right now as a healer, next to Infallible Aether. So Olorime gives everybody Major Courage. The only other set that has a source of Major Courage is going to be Spell Power Cure, but Spell Power Cure has a lot of limitations that Olorime does not have. Now Olorime does come from Cloud Rest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset DLC in order to grab this set. I have the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version if you're not able to clear Vet Cloud Rest +1 or above. So very, very powerful set. Make sure to pick this set up if you want to kind of do vet trials as a healer. While I mentioned that Spell Power Cure does give you the same amount of buff, there's a lot of limitations to Spell Power Cure, mainly the fact that it can only proc on 6 people, and it does require you to overheal, and it is a proc, so it is only 50% chance to hit. So Olorime basically covers all the weaknesses that Spell Power Cure has. So Spell Power Cure, while it does give the same exact buff, Major Courage, it has so many limitations that Olorime does not have, that Olorime is by far superior to Spell Power Cure. Now, other body sets that you might want to pick up and have ready. So these sets you should pick up as a Vet Trials healer. And that is because your other healer might be responsible for Olorime depending on the fight. So for example, in Cloud Rest, the kiting healer might be wearing Olorime, and if you're the group healer, you don't want to double up on Olorime. So do want to make sure to have all these sets on hand. Ideally, you'll be able to swap back and forth between any combination of these sets, the bodies and back bar sets. So that's just something that you're going to want to keep in mind here. But these are the sets that you are going to want to pick up at the very least as in armor pieces. Pardon me while I try to find all of these sets here. Healing Mage, also known as Mending, because when you have a drop, it will drop as, for example, Robe of Mending, not Robe of Healing Mage or Healing Mage Robe or anything like that. The Healing Mage is a pretty nice set to have here. It's more used in progression groups, less so in sort of score running groups here. The 5-piece, when you use an area of effect heal ability, you reduce the weapon damage of all enemies within 10 meters of you by X amount for 3 seconds. So area of effect heal, that's pretty much most of your heals, if not all of the heals that you're going to be running. And then while it does say weapon damage, it does reduce all PvE damage. So PvE mobs use one stat to calculate damage, so even though it says weapon damage, this does reduce that one stat instead. Now, you do have to be within 10 meters, so you will typically be in group when you are running Mending. And because the proc is only lasts for 3 seconds, you do want this on the body. It doesn't last long enough to warrant being used as a back bar set here. Alright, any other ones up here? I have a lot of sets here, so just want to keep this kind of short. Master Architect. So as a Warden healer, one of your ultimates costs 90 ultimate. That's going to be Healing Thicket. You might be running that in 4-man content. You will not typically be using it too much in 12-man content. You will typically be using Warhorn instead, which does reduce the potency of Master Architect. But if you're running 4-man content, you might want to consider picking up Master Architect for that Major Slayer bonus. You can just basically run trees, make sure you're next to the 2 DPS, and boom, there you go. Both of your DPS have Major Slayer, which is a very large bonus there. And you'll be able to give it more consistently than Warhorn, because Warhorn does obviously cost more ultimate than your Healing Thicket will. So if you run primarily 4-man content, Master Architect is a good set to pick up. Light Armor set from Halls of Fabrication, so you will need to have access to the Morrowind expansion in order to farm this set. Let's see, other sets here, trying to find them all. So many sets here. Sanctuary. So Sanctuary is another set that you're going to want to pick up here. And this is, again, a body set because that 5-piece bonus is a static bonus. So you just want to make sure to have that here. Now, Sanctuary is a very niche set. You're not necessarily going to be wearing this for every single trial here. So the 5-piece increases healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. This healing received is not the same as healing done, so this does kind of stack differently compared to healing done. So this is very useful in trials where you want additional heals or you just really don't have any other set to run. This is limited because you do have to be within 10 meters in order to get the benefits of Sanctuary. A couple of examples where you might find Sanctuary being used. Some groups, progressing groups in VMAW hard mode will run Sanctuary instead of Mending because a lot of the damage from VMAW hard mode, the Rakat fight is environmental, which Mending does not reduce. A lot of groups will be running Sanctuary instead to help out with healing strength. Cloud Rest is another example where you might see Sanctuary being run for the additional heal, especially in Execute, to get out of that Baneful Mark debuff. Sanctuary is probably one of the lower priority sets that you want to pick up, but it does have its uses in trials and 12-man content. And finally, we have Worm. Worm is another body set because the 5-piece is a static bonus, so it reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. This just helps out sustain. Obviously, you need to have Magicka DPS in order to make use of Worm, but I'd argue that even if you have 8 stamina DPS, you can still run Worm because it still affects your 2 healers and it still affects your 2 tanks who use a lot of Magicka abilities as their buffs, as buffs and debuff abilities there. But it is going to be a lot stronger in groups with have Magicka DPS, particularly Asylum and Cloud Rest, where pretty much all groups are running Magicka DPS, full Magicka DPS. Worm is going to be very helpful there. The 4% reduction in Magicka abilities is quite nice for overall sustain here. So those are kind of your body sets. Now let's talk about our back bar sets. So Jorvuld's Guidance is a very powerful set to have as a Warden healer because a lot of your buffs that you're giving out are named buffs. So this basically increases duration of your major, minor buffs, and damage shields that you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. Wardens are not going to be giving out damage shields. You don't have any abilities that give out damage shields, so you don't have to worry about that. But you do give out major and minor buffs. So this just helps boost the duration of your buffs. So you give out major ward, major resolve, minor intellect, minor toughness, minor endurance, major force from Warhorn. So this buffs all of those by 40%. Duration is buffed by 40%. Basically gives you, again, a little bit more time to kind of strategize your buff kind of rotation a little bit. You can maybe don't have to buff quite as often, so that way you can kind of focus in on a little bit more on healing that way. So Jorvuld's Guidance is very strong here. Now, Jorvuld's Guidance is really strong because it helps buff the major force uptime from Warhorn, which is why you're able to run it as your back bar set. So all of your major and minor buff abilities are going to be on your back bar. So as long as you have it on your back bar and you're running them, the duration will remain constant. So let's say you give Major Ward, Major Resolve while you're on your Jorvuld's Guidance bar and you swap to your front bar, that duration is still going to remain exactly the same. You're not going to magically lose that 40% because you happen to swap off your Jorvuld's Guidance bar. So that's where Jorvuld's comes into play here. That's why it's considered a back bar set. The other back bar set that I want to mention here is going to be Infallible Aether. Let me see if I can find it first. Oh, where are you, Infallible Aether? Here it is, Infallible Aether, also known as Infallible Mage. This is a light armor set that's dropped from the 3 Craglorn Trials. So it's a base game set. Pick it up in any of the 3 Craglorns. So this, first glance, looks like a DPS set. Spell crit, minor slayer, spell damage, spell crit for your 2, 3, 4, 5 piece. But that 5 piece bonus there is what makes it a support set. So enemies do damage with a fully charged heavy attacks or afflicted with minor vulnerability for 10 seconds, increasing your damage taken by 8%. Note that while the wording does say fully charged, it doesn't actually have to be fully charged. You can just basically do a medium weave and it'll still happen to apply minor vulnerability. So Infallible Mage is very nice on a healer because you will be heavy attacking in order to basically get your major mending from your Resto Staff passive lines, and you will also be having a heavy attack in order to better sustain yourself. So healers will typically be running Infallible Aether here for that minor vulnerability uptime. Now, because it does last for 10 seconds, you can run this on the back bar instead. Instead of running it on your body, you can just proc it on your back bar, swap to your front bar, and just go back to your back bar to re-up it after 10 seconds. This is a very powerful set. Minor vulnerability basically interacts multiplicatively with things like Minor Slayer and Minor Berserk. So Minor Vulnerability is a very powerful debuff to have to help boost DPS. And while you can run this on like a heavy attack Sork, it's definitely more useful on a healer rather than a DPS, just because heavy attacking on a DPS is generally speaking a DPS loss. So you don't have to worry about the DPS loss as a healer, so that's why Infallible Aether has kind of seen its way over to the healing side of builds. Now, I talked about front back bar set. So what about our front bar? So you don't have to run the Asylum or the Master's Restoration Staff on the front bar. I personally prefer running either of these two, but you can run, for example, the Jorvuld's Guidance Resto Staff if you so desire. But the buffs from the Asylum Restoration Staff and the Master's Restoration Staff are very powerful, and I would be you would have to really argue with me to kind of get me to agree to kind of drop those two sets. So I have here the Asylum's Perfected Restoration Staff. You can go with the imperfect version. Difference between the two is basically just 10% difference. It's instead of reducing it by 30%, it's reducing it by 27%. So when you cast Blessing of Protection, the cost of your Magicka and Stamina healing abilities are reduced by 30% for the perfect version, 27% for the imperfect version, for 3 seconds. So that's basically 2 abilities you can get off here. Blessing of Protection is morphed into Combat Prayer. So you should be maintaining Combat Prayer for that Minor Berserk, especially if you don't have any Nightblades in your group here, or Wardens. So you can basically do cast Combat Prayer, and then you can use 2 Orbs for 30% less. And Orbs is a fairly expensive skill, so this just helps out your sustain by a really nice margin here. Now the other Resto Staff that I mentioned is the Master's Restoration Staff. So the Master's Restoration Staff, basically the initial heal of Grand Healing restores 258 stamina to each friendly target affected. So Grand Healing morphs into Healing Springs or Illustrious Healing, both of which are pretty nice skills to have. This basically just helps out stamina sustain. So very similar to Settled Rkugamz, just in a unique staff form here. So Masters, again, the stamina is nice for stamina DPS obviously, but it's also nice for magic DPS in instances where you might need to dodge roll, block, break free very often there. So you can run either of these two sets here, depending on really which one you want to go for. The Master's Restoration Staff is a base game set. It comes from Dragonstar Arena, which is a Craglorn. But the Asylum's Restoration Staff is you do have to clear Asylum in order to get the Asylum's Restoration Staff. The perfect version comes from hard mode or leaderboard trial, weekly leaderboard coffers. So the perfected version is going to be more difficult to get, but the imperfect version is just as good, in my opinion, compared to the perfect version here. Now let's talk about weapon traits, jewelry traits, armor traits, enchants, all that stuff. So for your backbar lightning staff, you basically really have two main options for your traits. That's really going to depend on what enchant option you decide to go for. So I have the shock damage enchant here, and that's just to help proc concussed, which gives us off balance. You need to have, your enemy needs to be concussed in order to get off balance to proc. So I have infused here to basically just proc my shock damage enchant more often, in theory giving me better concussed uptime. The other option is to run charged instead. So charged increases the chance of applying status effects. So with the destruction staff passive as well as charged, you pretty much are guaranteed to apply concussed every time the shock damage enchant goes off. That being said, with charge, you basically need to maintain blockade the whole time because your cooldown will be 4 seconds instead of 2 seconds as it will be with infused. And the debuff lasts for 4 seconds. So you basically need to make sure, if you are running charge, that you are proccing their enchant on cooldown in order to maintain that concussed uptime. For your front bar, you do have a lot more flexibility though, both in terms of traits as well as enchants. So for traits, I have the Infused here. If you want a stronger enchant bonus, you can go with Powered for stronger heals. You can go with Nirn Honed for stronger heals as well as damage in case you are also off DPSing, for example. Less common with Warden healers, but never know, you might be able to make a kind of off DPS healer sort of Warden build in 12-man content, easier trials I should say. You can go with Defending if you need a little bit more survivability. That's another option. You can go with Decisive if you want some more ultimate. Generally speaking, the most common traits that I've seen for front bar are Infused and Powered. Those are the two most common ones that I've seen. Powered for obviously the healing bonus here, and Infused for the stronger enchant bonuses. So the enchants, I have a weapon damage enchant here. That just helps boost my spell damage, which gives me more healing strength. Other enchant options you might want to consider. You might be asked to run a weakening enchant. So very similar to Mending, the weakening enchant reduces the incoming damage to the group. So obviously very nice to have here, especially for progression style guilds. Absorb Magic enchant is another option that you might see being used on the front bar, as you can imagine, for the additional sustain here. So if you do need a sustain, then you can run an Absorb Magic enchant. One other enchant that you probably won't be asked to run, but it is still something you want to keep in the back of your head, is going to be the Crusher enchant. Due to changes with one-handed enchant strength and potency, Crusher has kind of been possibly moved over to healers depending on whatever your raid lead wants. So it is still the full strength on two-handed weapons. So tanks can no longer proc Crusher on the main hand on their sword and board bar without it being at half strength. While tanks are shifting over to staves and potentially bow back bars to maintain the full strength Crusher, you might be asked to run Crusher in order to keep good Crusher uptime, because this is a little bit of a learning curve to just kind of make sure for tanks to run Blockade and make sure that they have Blockade up to proc Crusher at all times. So you might be asked to run Crusher. You might not necessarily need to run it, but to help uptimes, you might be asked to run Crusher. So that's something you want to keep in the back of your head. I haven't seen it being used all too often so far, but it is something that you might be asked to do here. In terms of jeweler traits and enchants, so you have really three primary enchant options here. The first one is going to be Magicka Regen, like I have here, obviously for the additional regen bonus. Then the other one's going to be spell damage for the additional healing strength. So obviously this is going to depend on which sets you run, because obviously the set bonus is going to be different. So for example, with Jorvuld, I have 2 Magicka Regen bonuses. I'm running Olorime, which also has 2 Magicka Regen bonuses, so I don't really need any sort of additional Magicka Regen glyphs, so I only have that 1 regen glyph and then 2 spell damage glyphs instead. Now for traits, Infused is a good option, always good because you have stronger enchant bonuses. You can also go with Arcane to help out your resource pool, gives you a little bit stronger heals, also gives you a little bit better sustain overall. Now, one last enchant that I want to mention here that you might want to consider running if you are an Argonian, and an Argonian only, is going to be potion cooldown glyphs. These basically reduce the time of your potion cooldown by 5 seconds each, 8 seconds if they're infused. And as an Argonian, you get 4,000 health, magicka, and stamina back whenever you drink a potion, so it really helps out your sustain if you're able to drink potions a little bit faster. That being said, drinking potions more often means you're using potions more often, which means your wallet is gonna take a hit. Just bear that in mind before you decide to change your Argonian healer enchants into potion cooldown glyphs. Make sure you can actually afford your potion addiction that way. Now, traits and enchant for armor traits. I have Divines on my small pieces with max magic enchants, and then I have Infused on my large pieces with prismatic enchants. The prismatics give me a little bit more health, which allow me to run Clockwork Citrus Fillet or Witchman's Potent Brew. It also gives me more stamina, so that way I'm not caught, being stunned by something. I have more stamina in order to break free that way. So I like to have Prismatics on my healers' large pieces here. You don't have to. You can run Divine's Max Magicka, you can run Infused Max Magicka, but I highly recommend you pick up Prismatics, at the very least for your large pieces. You don't necessarily have to do it for your small pieces like I have here. I just have Max Magicka on my small pieces, but you definitely want to have them on your large pieces at the very least if you are going to be running Prismatics. So that is pretty much it for gear. Let's go ahead and go over our character sheet. So I am a Dark Elf here. Dark Elves, while they are a potentially strong healing class, they're not going to be the best healing class. The two best healing races in the game right now are going to be Bretons and Argonians. Bretons get 2000 max magicka and they get 7% cost reduction to all their magicka abilities, making them a very, very powerful sustain. Their sustain is just absolutely nuts. So very strong, you get very nice max magicka pools. So don't ever really need to worry about sustain as a Breton healer. Argonians get 1000 max magicka, 1000 max health, and they get 6% healing done. So in terms of just raw healing output, Argonians definitely are king. They also get 4000 max health, stamina, and magicka back whenever they drink a potion, which ends up giving them another very nice sustain bonus. It's not going to be quite as strong as the Breton bonus, but unlike the Breton bonus, you do happen to get health and stamina back with every potion you drink, so it does have a little bit of additional utility that way. So Bretons and Argonians are going to be the top races for healing. Dark Elves are not bad. High Elves are not bad either, so those two are typically more DPS-oriented races, but you can still run them as healers. So if you do want to do a magic DPS on the side with this character, then you might want to consider making your character a High Elf or a Dark Elf. They both get 258 spell damage, which gives them stronger heals. High Elves get 2000 max magicka, and Dark Elves get 1875 max magicka, so very nice options there. Now there is one other race that you might want to consider running for healers, but it's definitely not going to be as strong as the other four races that I've already talked about. The Khajiits get 10% additional critical healing done. Typically speaking, healers will not be running very high crit chance. You can see here I'm only running 29% crit chance, so they're not really going to make that much use out of that 10% additional healing, crit healing that Khajiits have. So while you could run a Khajiit, I personally would not recommend it, especially when the four other races that I mentioned earlier are much better options. But if you want to run a Khajiit healer for whatever reason, you can certainly do so. They also get 825 max health, stamina, and magicka, and 85 stamina and magicka regen. So they get a little bit of sustain, a little bit of additional resources. But that 10% crit healing is not quite as strong as, for example, 258 spell damage, or 7% cost reduction to all your magicka abilities, or even that potion passive from Argonians. Now for attributes, 64 points into magicka. If you're not running Prismatics, you might need to shift a few points into health. So I would put about 10 points max into health, and so that way you're not giving up too much max magicka. So remember, max magicka does affect the strength of your heals, so don't want to give up too much max magicka that way. For our Mundus Stone, we are going with the Ritual. You have two options when it comes to Mundus, and that really depends on what you're lacking in, depending on your kind of gear setup. The Ritual increases healing done, so it just increases your healing strength. The other option is going to be the Atronach. So the Atronach increases your magicka regen. So if you need more regen, you can go with the Atronach. That also allows you to spec a little bit more heavily into spell damage. If you go with the Ritual, it increases your healing done, so you have to spec a little bit less into spell damage, and you can invest a little bit more into your regen instead. Those are your two primary Mundus options here. And for food, I am running Clockwork Citrus Fillet here, and again, like I mentioned earlier, I can run this because I am running Prismatics on my body pieces. If I'm not running body pieces, then I would be running, if I'm not running Prismatic on my body pieces, I would be running Orzgore's Red Hrothgar instead. So the difference between Orzgore's Red Hrothgar and Clockwork Citrus Fillet / Witch Mothers is that Clockwork and Witch Mothers will give me additional max magicka. You do give up some health, and you do give up some magicka regen in order to get that max magicka back, but that does give you a little bit more healing strength because of that max magicka pool. Orzgore's Red Hrothgar, which I don't have on hand right now, gives you 5,000 max health and 459 additional magicka regen. So you get more health and you get more magicka regen, but as kind of a trade-off, you don't get that max magicka bonus. So your heals will be a little bit weaker, but your sustain and survivability will go up if you're using Orzgore's Red Hrothgar instead. Now for our abilities. For our front bar, we have Energy Orb, Healing Springs, Combat Prayer, Leeching Vines, Blue Betty, and Enchanted Forest. Leeching Vines is going to be a flex spot, and I'll go over your flex abilities options in a second. For your back bar, we have Budding Seeds, Elemental Drain, Blockade of Storms, Enchanted Growth, Expansive Frostcloak, and Aggressive Warhorn. So these two abilities can be considered flex spots. I personally would not say that either of them are flex spots, but you can, if needed, swap these abilities out for other abilities. So for your flex spots, Leeching Vines here, you can replace this. If you need additional kind of mobility, you need the additional kind of Major Expedition. Very useful for things like if you're the tank healer in Asylum, or if in Cloud Rest, if you're the kiting healer. It's going to be either Bird of Prey or Deceptive Predator. The Deceptive Predator will give you Major Evasion while you have it slotted, which reduces the damage you take from area of effect attacks by 10%. So I personally would go with Deceptive Predator, but you can go with Bird of Prey as well. Minor Berserk does not affect your healing done, it only affects damage, so it's not very useful that way. So that's why you want to go with Deceptive Predator if you are going to be running Falcon's Swiftness. Now under the green balance skill tree, these two abilities are generally not all that useful. So Lotus Blossom, you need to light attack or heavy attack in order to get the heal off, not really all that. I mean, you might see some use out of it, but you're better off just running something like Enchanted Growth instead, which gives you stronger heal overall. And same thing with Nature's Grasp. It's not all that strong. It's basically a heal over time, but I personally don't think it's going to be very useful overall. In terms of Winter's Embrace, Shimmering Shield and Frozen Device are two abilities that you're going to want to consider learning, though you might not necessarily have to use them. Shimmering Shield basically gives you major heroism whenever you get hit by a projectile, so in certain fights it might be useful to have this here. You get your Warhorn up a little bit faster. But again, it's only if you're getting hit by projectiles. And Frozen Device is basically the Warden version of Chains, so you basically can pull enemies over to you, assuming that they can be pulled. Not going to be used all too often, but it can be quite useful if you're in an ad fight where you might need to help the tank out with kind of chaining and ads. For example, in VMAW hard mode, or not VMAW hard mode, VMAW against the twins, it might be beneficial to actually run this as a Warden healer, so that way your tank can focus on kind of keeping track of the boss and things like that. So it's something that you might want to consider picking up here. Under the Resto staff line, there are a few options here. So if you want, you can run Light Champion as your ultimate instead. Although, in my opinion, Enchanted Forest and Healing Thicket are going to be a little bit better because it's cheaper and it heals for more, even though Light Champion does give Major Force and Major Protection. So it is an option if you want to run this as a front bar kind of ultimate. Now for 4-man content, you can also run either Mutagen or Rapid Regen here. You wouldn't run this in 12-man content because it only affects 2 people at a time, so you'd have to cast it 6 times to hit everybody. But for 4-man content, it's a very nice heal over time ability to have active while your group is running through trash or things like that. So I highly recommend picking this up for 4-man content. If you need to run a shield, you can run a shield, Harness Magic, or Depth Magic, pick your choice. Let's see here. Overflowing Altar is another option to run here. This is going to be very useful for the minor lifesteal. So very strong, as well as that synergy, heals for a crap ton. It's very useful in Cloud Rest and Asylum. So if you're running those two, I highly recommend getting Overflowing Altar here. Bone Surge is an ability that you're going to see limited use of. It's a very niche use. I see this used most often in Cloud Rest for that major vitality bonus that you get from that synergy there. Usually the off-tank will be running this, but you might not also want to run this as a healer as well. And if you need a purge, obviously you can run Efficient Purge. So definitely want to make sure to have this ability here. Blue Betty will act as a small purge. It'll remove 1 negative effect from you, but if you need an immediate purge, or you need to purge your allies, you're going to want Efficient Purge instead. Now for our champion points, the CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so the CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 in Arcanist and 75 in Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, really however you'd like. So I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. Now you can push Arcanist and Tenacity up to 100, which gives you 70 points instead to play around with the remaining nodes. If you want to push for that last 1%, you can certainly do so. For our blue CPs, 75 Blessed and 81 Elfborn. So very similar to Arcanist and Tenacity that we mentioned earlier. You can push these up to 100 to get that last 1 percentage point if you so desire. That being said, part of your job as a healer is also to do a little bit of additional DPS. So you might want to just keep these at 75 and 81 and invest a little bit more into DPS nodes. The blue CPs are, generally speaking, more oriented towards DPS. So in this particular configuration, I have 49 LA Expert, 26 Spell Erosion, 13 Master at Arms, and 26 in the Thaumaturge. But again, you can dump 100 and put the 70 points really wherever you really like from the remaining nodes. Finally, for our red CPs, this is a one-size-fits-most approach, so this will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content, but it is not going to maximize your mitigation for any single piece of content. So you will want to change some red CP points around if you want to maximize your mitigation. 81 into Ironclad, 61 in Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, that is pretty much it for all the build information. So now let's go ahead and talk about healing philosophy. So really, the healer basically has 3 jobs. Arguably 4. Obviously, you want to heal your allies, make sure none of them die. You want to buff your allies, you want to debuff the enemy, and then you also want to stay alive. Obviously, staying alive is paramount. If you're dead healer, you're not able to heal anybody. So staying alive is obviously priority number 1. And then from there, you kind of need to balance out those remaining 3 jobs. You basically need to heal enough that you're not overhealing, but your allies are also not dying. And if once you kind of reach that happy medium where you're healing enough that you're not overhealing, you're basically not wasting magic at healing people who are already at full health, then you can start focusing in on buffing and debuffing. And do keep in mind that a lot of these kind of jobs are kind of bundled into one ability. Classic example, Combat Prayer. Not only does it heal, it also buffs your allies as well. So you basically get 2 in 1 in terms of abilities. So Combat Prayer, very nice thing to have. So always want to try to make sure Combat Prayer is up. It lasts for 8 seconds. It lasts, I believe, for 11 and some weird number, 11 seconds if you have Jorvuld's Guidance as a body set, or if you have Jorvuld's Guidance on both bars. Just want to make sure you have Combat Prayer going. Orbs is probably the best way for you to help support your group because of both the heal that it provides as well as the resource return. So in terms of raw healing per second done, Orbs is the strongest heal in the game. It just dishes out the most amount of heals per second. On top of that, you also get the additional combustion synergy, which returns resources back to your allies. Very important to use. So I personally always try to make sure that there's at least 1 orb on the field at all times, whether that's from me or my other healer. I just want to make sure I have orbs out because again, the healing per second is very strong and your DPS are obviously going to want those additional resources. So make sure to have an orb out at all times. From there, again, Combat Prayer acts as both a heal and a buff. So you want to use it every 8 seconds for the Minor Berserk buff. So you basically have that burst heal going every 8 seconds already. So you already have a nice heal going from that, along with your heal over time from Orbs. Now on your back bar, Budding Seeds is one of those leave and forgets. Now you can't activate it a second time to get that immediate heal, but more often than not, I like to just drop it on my tank and let them decide when to use a synergy. That way I don't have to worry necessarily about needing to activate it at a certain point. But Budding Seeds can act as a burst heal if you just double tap it. In another burst heal that you might want to consider running is going to be Enchanted Growth. This is a little bit weird because it is a cone, as you can tell from the effect here, it just shoots out as a cone. It does provide minor intellect and minor endurance, so it does help out your sustain for your DPS, so you do want to make sure to hit it every 20 seconds, just so that way they have the additional sustain there. But this does act as a burst heal, very similar to Combat Prayer, so not only do you buff, you also heal at the same time. Then Expansive Frost Cloak just gives everybody Minor Ward and Major Ward and Major Resolve, which helps out their survivability. This is a very long lasting buff, so I believe it lasts 27 seconds without Jorvuld's. With Jorvuld's it lasts 33 seconds. So you don't have to cast it very often, just make sure to try to keep it up. Obviously maintain Ellie Drain for the Minor Magicka Steal, and then Blockade for the off bounce uptime. So again, it's easier to kind of see healing done in action rather than for me to explain it, so I do have links in the description below to a couple of healers who might not necessarily play Warden healing, but you can kind of get an idea of how to approach healing based on their play styles. So the ones that I have below are going to be Tabata, who raids on pre-CEU, heals the feels. Style Anima, who I don't believe streams on Twitch, but she does have a YouTube channel. And then Sophie, who actually primarily heals on her Warden healer. So if you want to look at specifically Warden healing, I highly recommend checking out Sophie. The other 3 I know do have Warden healers, but they might not necessarily play them all the time. I know Tabata plays Templar very often, as well as Sword Healers. Style Anima also plays Sword Healer very often, but I know Sophie for certain will main her Warden Healer whenever she can. So if you're interested in specifically Warden healing, I recommend checking out Sophie's channel and her streams. So that is it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.